And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will this lasagna I have in the freezer turn out okay once I've backed my car over it more than twice? And with the UN Climate Change Conference underway, will we all get to the bottom of what makes those Scottish cheese sandwiches so delicious? And now, the podcast host who looks good in a utility belt, even when it's just a Robin costume, Pete Dominic.
Thank you very much, Pico, and that is right. Oh, it's so great to have these openings each and every day. I hope you enjoy them as much as I certainly do. And we are off. Welcome to episode 466, I think. Joining me today, my guests are the Legal Eagle, Eric Segall, with a brand new jingle introduction, which is hilarious, written by none other than the great Pete Coe. And also joining me, Anushay Hossain, for another great conversation about her new book, The Pain Gap, which is so good. Segall, Anushay, and you. Happy to have you joining me as well, as always. So great to hear from you each and every day. So sorry that I haven't gotten back to so many of you lately. I've been inundated with amazing, thoughtful messages and questions and ideas, and I'm really trying to keep up, but I'm super behind, so I will... don't give up. I will get back to you. I just got back to my own first cousin, Darcy, this morning. So I'm trying to prioritize appropriately and get back to everybody. But thank you. Keep the messages coming. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Thanks again for all the birthday wishes. Very special thanks to one of my closest buddies from high school, Eric Doust, who reached out to me yesterday to tell me a really kind thing about how proud he is of me. You know, it's always nice when someone says they're proud of you, but it certainly depends who it is, right? It matters. And when it's a buddy of yours from high school that you always admired and respected and are still close with, it really means a lot. And Eric is also a very generous subscriber and regular listener to podcasts. And he reached out to me yesterday and texted me and said, just got to tell you how amazing you've been with the podcast. And I'm more and more impressed and exhausted at what seems like incredible prep for your shows every day. Fucking amazing, my friend. I come in and out, and then I binge middle of the episode with your wife, Val, right now. Really great stuff and amazing topics. We're knee-deep in educating ourselves on being better parents and anti-racist, and I love hearing from so many people you have on. I'm really proud of you. It really is awesome what you are doing. I know it's probably hard as shit, but know that it's rewarding from my perspective and sounds like from so many others as well. Eric, thank you. Dousty, I really appreciate it. I love that. It made my day. Made my day. So, okay. Lots to talk about here at the top. I've got, like I said, Eric Segall, Anushay Hossain. I've got a whole bunch of audio to play. Climate change and COVID and the arguments yesterday at the Supreme Court, as well as something on the CRT, on the critical race theory panic that is sweeping across America like a cancer, like a virus. It is just... This is what I tweeted yesterday, by the way. I thought this is one of my better observations, just because I've got some perspective covering politics and media and political media for over 10 years. And I wrote, the whole CRT in schools argument has been one of the greatest propaganda triumphs on the right I can recall in my last 12 years of covering politics. The whole concept of what was started by one dude at an evil right-wing think tank and now has rapidly bled into so many of the whites. And so it has. Talked to a guy today in Texas, talked to a guy in St. Louis as well. Both those places, they're having the same issues at their Board of Education, that parents are terrified that their young, precious, malleable-minded children are going to learn about the horrors of America's past. And this, of course, coming so often from parents who are teaching their own children that they're going to burn in hell, an eternal damnation, if they don't do the will of the Lord. I mean, imagine teaching your child they're going to be damned to eternal hellfire if they didn't do the right thing by the Lord. I mean, it's not even a thing that's real. It's not provable. And then you're concerned what they might learn that Thomas Jefferson raped several women and the rest of the horrors of actual American history, along with the heroes and the triumphs of American history. And then let the kids discuss it. Let the kids decide how they feel about it. That's what teachers hopefully do their best. At their best, that's what they do. They host a discussion. They share points of view. We can talk about what's age appropriate. We can have that discussion anytime. But this ridiculous manufactured argument about critical race theory, which is code for they're terrified that they're going to teach their kids about America's past. Tim Wise has written so brilliantly about all of this at timjwise.medium.com. Definitely check that out. But here is one part of the Good Liars comedian journalist group. Love these guys. Jason Selvig was in Virginia talking to Virginia voters about what they're concerned about here on Election Day. This is from, I think, Monday or over the weekend. Either way, this is tough. You get the point.
What's the most important issue in the governor's race here in Virginia?
Getting back to the basics of teaching children, not teaching them critical race theory.
And what is critical race theory?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because I don't understand it that much, but it's something that what little bit that I know I don't care for.
And what have you heard that you don't?
Well,
that you don't like?
I'm not going to, I don't have that much knowledge on it, but It's something that I don't care for.
All right. Well, you probably know how I feel and think about that. Let's get some responses from other folks on Twitter about that exchange. Garrett Graff writes, the extent to which the GOP base is organized around being against things they can't articulate and or don't understand is astounding. Keith Boykin, I don't have that much knowledge on critical race theory, but it's something I don't care for, he says. This is America, a nation with far too many people who are easily triggered by any conversation that forces them to come to terms with racism and white supremacy. Andy Richter of Conan writes, I could see people wanting to be respectful, but being against something when you don't know what it is one of the many definitions of dumb, or at least gullible mark. Jeff Yang writes, best evidence yet that CRT backlash has nothing to do with education and everything to do with asserting white supremacy. This guy doesn't even have a kid in school. He doesn't know what CRT is. He knows it's something to do with black, non-white people space. That's enough. Richard Marks says, this right here, the textbook MAGA voter. And finally, Walter Schaub writes, hate is easier than thinking, and that is why it sells so well. Yeah, this is taking off. It is spreading. It is not going away. And hopefully in every community in this country, there is a group of awesome parents that are organizing to combat it and support their local school boards and prevent this from getting much worse than it already is. It'll probably get worse before it gets better, but look out for your local diversity, equity, and inclusion groups. They go by all kinds of different names, but check out your Facebook if you're on that. There's probably a group. Reach out to friends, like-minded friends, and do whatever you can, because otherwise they're going to put these Klan-like folks on the board. And our kids are going to not only are they not going to learn about the truth about the Civil War, they're not going to learn the truth about January 6th or anything else. All right, well, there's a lot more to talk about, including climate change. The climate change negotiations, conversations have begun. It is COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference taking place in Glasgow, England, 31st of October, November 12th, bringing parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I'll be playing lots of clips, talking with lots of folks about this. You know, I forgot to play the last 24 sound effect, didn't I? Okay, beep, boop, boop, boop. Here we go. Boris Johnson welcoming world leaders to Glasgow, England.
James Bond, who generally comes to the climax of his highly lucrative films strapped to a doomsday device, desperately trying to work out which coloured wire to pull to turn it off, while a red digital clock ticks down remorselessly to a detonation that will end human life as we know it. And we are in roughly the same position.
The fuck? Really, Bojo? That was just a soundbite. Hopefully The rest of his speech was good. Now, here's the Queen of England, who doesn't think she's going to live to see the worst effects of climate change, but still thinks that we should do the right thing.
Of course, the benefits of such actions will not be there to enjoy for all of us here today. None of us will live forever. But we are doing this not for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children, and those who will follow in their footsteps.
Okay, well said, Queen Elizabeth. You know, she wanted to say, none of us are going to live forever. Even me. You know, she wanted to say that. All right, well, here's our president, Joe Biden, who also he definitely fell asleep while he was watching other world leaders. An aide had to come over and, wake him up. But he was definitely Sleepy Joe yesterday, but not in his opening comments.
It's simple. Will we act? Will we do what is necessary? Will we seize the enormous opportunity before us? Or will we condemn future generations to suffer? This is the decade that will determine the answer, this decade. The science is clear. We only have a brief window left before us to raise our ambitions and to meet the task that's rapidly narrowing.
All right, I actually got a little more from you. I found some more Joe Biden for you yesterday in Glasgow, COP26, the climate summit.
We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example. I know it hasn't been the case, and that's why my administration is working overtime to show that our climate commitment is action, not words.
Activist Greta Thunberg was not invited this time inside the summit, but she's there and she had something to say outside the talks.
We say no more blah, blah, blah. No more exploitation of people and nature and the planet. No more exploitation. No more blah, blah, blah. No more whatever the fuck they're doing inside there.
Whoa! Hey! Young lady!
We're sick and tired of it, and we're gonna make the change, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. You watch your mouth, young lady. How dare you use the F word to try to make your passionate point about saving the planet. There's a time and a place. Nah, I'm just kidding. That was awesome. She's awesome. And now I want to play for you the great David Attenborough, who at the age of 95 gave the opening talk to world leaders. Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, the rest of the world leaders in the room for this. You'll hear music and some animal sounds because there was a great video playing. You'll also hear some testimonials from young folks around the world. The great David Attenborough, who told the COP26 conference delegates, the world is looking at you. They had to turn tragedy into triumph and tackle climate change. His speech in which he said the fate of future generations was at risk drew a stand innovation. And I want to share the whole 7 minutes with you because he's amazing and he's British and this is awesome. And I totally loved it. And rarely do I do this. And if you want to skip ahead, it's 7 minutes, but let's do it. Let's listen to it together.
As you spend the next 2 weeks debating, negotiating, persuading, and compromising, as you surely must, it's easy to forget that ultimately the emergency climate comes down to a single number: the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. The measure that greatly determines global temperature. And the changes in that one number is the clearest way to chart our own story, for it defines our relationship with our world. For much of humanity's ancient history, that number bounced wildly between 180 and 300. And so too did global temperatures. It was a brutal and unpredictable world. At times, our ancestors existed only in tiny numbers. But just over 10,000 years ago, that number suddenly stabilized. And with it, Earth's climate. We found ourselves in an unusually benign period, with predictable seasons and reliable weather. For the first time, civilization was possible, and we wasted no time in taking advantage of that. Everything we've achieved in the last 10,000 years was enabled by the stability during this time. The global temperature has not wavered over this period by more than plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. Until now. Burning of fossil fuels, our destruction of nature, our approach to industry, construction and learning are releasing carbon into the atmosphere at an unprecedented pace and scale. We are already in trouble. The stability we all depend on is breaking. This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who've done the least to cause this problem are being the hardest hit. Ultimately, all of us will feel the impact, some of which are now unavoidable.
My world is melting.
You think you have control, we actually have no control.
I'm absolutely terrified to bring a child to this world.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all-too-human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today. Perhaps that will give us the impetus we need to rewrite our story, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must have carbon emissions, halt them this decade. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. A new industrial revolution, powered by millions of sustainable innovations, is essential and is indeed already beginning. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet. And as we work to build a better world, we must acknowledge no nation has completed its development because no advanced nation is yet sustainable. All have a journey still to compete, so that all nations have a good standard of living and a modest footprint. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world, and our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
Can we fix climate problem in one generation? My answer would be yes, we have to.
We need to not just to talk about what we can do, but to do what we can.
This is a challenge that we should try to solve in a quick way with a long-term vision.
It comes down to this: the people alive now or the generation to come will look at this conference and consider one thing: did that number stop rising and start to drop as a result of commitments made here. There's every reason to believe that the answer can be yes. If working apart, we are force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellencies, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.
David Attenborough at COP26 yesterday, 95 years old, and that was wonderful. That guy has had quite a life, born in, I think, 1926, I was just reading. Well, let me switch from climate change to COVID. Yesterday, the species passed a grim milestone. Here's CNN with the breaking news.
Some grim breaking news this morning. The number of people who have died from COVID-19 worldwide has just surpassed 5 million. The global tally of deaths from Johns Hopkins University now stands at 5,425,000. It's just incredibly sad. We are now in the preventable phase of this, and that many deaths. It's just incredible here. It's followed. The U.S. has the most deaths, followed by Brazil and India.
CNN's Laura Jarrett, who co-hosts the early morning program, it's a great program. Christine Romans co-hosts it and has solo hosted it as well. It's mostly headlines and less analysis, but great analysis anyway. I read The Economist has it at like 16 million, the number. I mean, it depends on how you measure it, but it's certainly more than 5 million, maybe twice as much, maybe almost 3 times as many deaths. It's just haunting if you stop and think about it, which is why I'm moving on. All right, well, not quite. I mean, there's one more thing I wanted to play for you on COVID. This is Jeff Zients, is the head of the White House COVID task force. Really smart guy. He was there with the Fauci and the Rochelle Walensky of the CDC, and they were giving a little update. And first, he had this on the vaccination rates, which is good.
80% of adults now have at least their first shot, and 70% of adults are now fully vaccinated.
Well, that's pretty good news. We still have a long way to go. Here's more. And now, this, just to warn you, is extremely dry and boring. It's the most rote delivery I've heard from. I mean, this is what a government bureaucrat sounds like, I suppose, in your robot brain. But this is Jeff Zients. The guy is super smart, and he's trying to articulate this very important information as clearly as he can. And he's reading the hell out of it, but it's important, and so I'm going to play it for you because I think you're going to want to know how it works.
On Friday, within minutes of FDA's authorization, we began the process of moving 15 million doses from Pfizer's freezers and facilities to distribution centers. There, millions of doses are being packed with dry ice and tracking labels before they're loaded into small, specialized shipping containers. These containers are then placed onto trucks and airplanes and shipped to vaccination sites across the country. Over the next couple of days, several million doses will start arriving at local pediatricians and family doctors' offices, pharmacies, children's hospitals, community health centers, rural health clinics, and other locations. On Friday, within minutes of FDA's authorization, we began the process of moving 15 million doses from Pfizer's freezers and facilities to distribution centers. There, millions of doses are being packed with dry ice and tracking labels before they're loaded into small, specialized shipping containers. These containers are then placed onto trucks and airplanes and shipped to vaccination sites across the country. Over the next couple of days, several million doses will start arriving at local pediatricians and family doctors' offices, pharmacies, children's hospitals, community health centers, rural health clinics, and other locations.
That is the White House Coronavirus Response Coordinator. Go read about that guy. He's got a pretty interesting background, super successful at accomplishing what seem to be impossible tasks in both the public and private sector. I'd like to interview him or at least grab a drink with him someday. Jeff Zients. Someday, Jeff, you and I are going to sit and talk about all the work you did during this time. Okay, moving on. You know what? I'm just going to do the news dump. That is all I have for the audio. I've got a few audio clips on the arguments heard at the Supreme Court. I'll play those after my conversation with Anushay coming up and before I talk with Eric Segall about it, give you a couple other points of view on this issue that I talked with Segall about. But right now, I've got all kinds of other news stories just to mention the headlines in case you want to look into them and know about them. It's time for your news dump. Today's jingle is based on a headline I read in yesterday's news dump.
Running of the bulls in Spain, see the humans jump as they're trampled and gored to death for today's news dump.
Well done, Pico. I love you, sir. All right, let's get to it, shall we? First of all, it is Election Day here in the United States of America. Major elections to watch here in 2020. The Virginia's governor's race, the Minnesota police referendum, New Jersey governor's race, New York City mayoral race, other mayoral races in Boston, in Buffalo, Atlanta, and what is going on at your town council and referendums. Would love to hear from you. Email me the race you are watching, the campaign you volunteered or donated to. I'd love to hear from you on what you learned over the past 6 weeks about politics, if anything at all. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Let's go India Walton in Buffalo, yeah? Democratic Socialist defeating the four-term mayor Byron Brown in the primary back in June when we talked to her, notching what was called a stunning victory for the progressive left as she's charted a course to become the first socialist mayor of a major American city in more than 60 years. To win the mayor's office today, she's going to have to defeat him again, though. The incumbent mayor is mounting a write-in campaign. In Atlanta, 14 candidates vying to replace Democratic Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who's not running for re-election. Contest is happening amid alarm about the spike in violent crime, says CNN, as well as controversy over an effort by residents of a wealthy community of Buckhead to break off from the capital and create their own city. So a lot to report in Atlanta. And then, as I mentioned, Boston set to make history by electing a woman of color for the first time in a city dominated by white men. Polls have shown Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu, a champion of progressive policies, opening a commanding lead over her more moderate rival, Anissa Asabi George, who also serves as Boston City Council at large. So those are some of the elections to watch. Would love to hear from you on the elections you're watching, like I said. And in other news here on a Tuesday, at least 3 are dead, dozens missing after a 21-story building has collapsed in Nigeria in their largest city of Lagos. The construction worker who escaped the building with his brother told the Associated Press he estimated that over 100 people were in the inside of the 21-story building when it collapsed. Horrible story out of Nigeria. Here's a couple upsetting polls. 50% of Republicans don't believe their vote will be counted accurately. I wonder why that could be. Probably because the former president spent nearly the last year doubting the 2020 presidential election outcome with zero evidence, entirely because of his own ego and insecurities, entirely because of him. He has convinced Americans that also 82% of Fox News viewers believe the election was stolen, according to a new poll that also shows 31% of Americans in total believe the 2020 presidential election was stolen from Donald Trump. 82% of those who watch Fox News, 97% of those who trust One American News Network and Newsmax, and 2/3 of Republicans generally. Oh my goodness. Only 17% of independents and 11% of Democrats also think that the election was stolen. So we are in uncharted waters, my friends. Let's stick together. Let's stick close and remind each other about our own moral compass and what reality is. Remember that in Platoon? Barnes? Sergeant Barnes? Reality? Why, you don't know shit about reality. Death? I am death. Nailed that right there. Okay. Bro, you listening? Okay. Just for my brother. Sorry. Are you ready for the word of the year from the annual report for Oxford Languages? The 2021 word of the year is vax. How about that? Defined as a colloquialism, meaning either vaccine or vaccination as a noun or a vaccinate and vaccinate as a verb. Vax was relatively rare until this year. The company which publishes Oxford English Dictionary said Monday in September, vax appeared more than 72 times more frequently than the year before. And so there you go. The word first appeared as a noun in the 1980s, then started to be used as a verb in the 21st century, according to the report. Vax is word of the year. Use it in a sentence. Yeah, get vaxxed, please, now, and vaccinate your kids, please. Come on, you guys are all vaccinated if you're listening to the show, right? If you're not, email me and I want to interview you and let's talk. Be on the show if you're not. It's like a terrible reverse incentive, but I want to talk to you for sure. All right, more trouble for another major airline. It was Southwest a few weeks ago, but now it's American Airlines. Not a great weekend to be a passenger on American. Things did not improve on Monday. The airline canceled over 400 more flights, more than 40% of the day's total, bringing the number of canceled flights since Friday to more than 2,300, according to USA Today. More than 500 flights were delayed Monday. The airline is blaming a combination of bad weather and tight staffing. Got a tight staffing problem. You guys, you got a tight staff. And I think you're going to continue to have a tight staffing problem. Well, in the archives of terrible idea for a Halloween costume, a councilman in a town of Warsaw, Virginia, now apologizing for blackening his face to portray a character from the movie Coming to America, Eddie Murphy's character, apparently, and he had to apologize. He said he tries to be a good guy to everybody, regardless of the race. What cuts really deep is the fact that he was called a racist after darkening his face. He thought it was a tribute to the character, and he said, I try to be a good person and help others regardless of who they are. Well, there were other ideas for costumes that you passed on. So, sorry, buddy. What the fuck? And so apparently in China, they do not mess around with COVID. They were able to contain the virus apparently to the Wuhan province last April. And now they've sought to not just quell the virus, but eliminate it. So Disneyland in Shanghai, China, thousands of visitors were in line for rides and watching fireworks. And the staff just closed the amusement park quietly. And then people in hazmat suits just came streaming through the gates, preparing to test everyone, all 34,000 visitors at Shanghai Disneyland for COVID before they could leave for the day. It's a pretty fascinating story. I read it over at MSN.com, or rather Bloomberg, I guess. Yeah, Bloomberg. A joint project from the Marshall Project and the Associated Press has found that U.S. prisons are facing staff shortages as officers are quitting amid COVID. The coronavirus pandemic and its impact on the labor market have pushed many prison staffing systems into crisis. This is a really fascinating story in collaboration between the AP and the Marshall Project, exploring the state of the U.S. prison system during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to try to get somebody on from this story and talk more about it. Super important, really interesting, and we should all learn more about it. And in Texas, the great state of Texas that just keeps giving us nightmares, the governor is saying that the Texas school board should remove books with obscene material. He says kids are being exposed to pornographic images and other obscene material. So that's where we are right now. Texas State Representative Matt Krause recently launched an investigation on books in schools dealing with issues like racism or sexuality. He put a list of 850 books he wanted to question schools on. And it's a really terrible, terrible list. But this is a story we're going to have to continue to discuss and talk about. How you dealing with this, my Texas friends and listeners? All right, that's all I've got for you on today's news dump and last 24. So let us now move on to today's guests. I am very happy to have Eric Segall joining me coming up. But before that, we're going to discuss the new book by my friend Anushay Hossain, who is joining me. She's joined me several times here on the podcast. She is an author. She's a political analyst, and her new book is called The Pain Gap: How Sexism and Racism in Healthcare Kill Women. Always great to catch up with Anushay. I hope that you'll go get her book. Let her know that you heard her here on the show. At Anushay Hossain on Twitter. The book is out, and here we go.
Okay, I have to tell you something, Pete, that normally I wouldn't tell anybody, but can I just tell you?
Yes.
You really make me laugh. I mean, I fake laugh a lot. Hey, I know what you're thinking, but no, you always get me to crack up. It's really hard, man. I have to listen to dumb white guys trying to be funny all the time.
Yeah, well, humor is cultural for sure. I mean, do you laugh more at a certain ethnicity's material? Like, I have a lot to say about this.
No, I don't. But I'm just saying that, people always attack me because they're like, oh, you're racist against white guys and you never have white guys on your show. And I'm like, Pete Dominic was on my show. He's really funny.
Am I the only white?
No, I had Tim Wise.
Oh, he's
I had
garbage.
Steve Schmidt, pre-scandal. But I did have Steve Schmidt, who was very nice and very, very supportive early on. This is of my podcast.
Yeah.
My baby.
Well, I mean, it's a weird thing to say. You never have white guys too.
It is. But you know what I have to say before you start? The reason I say that is because I started Spilling Chai because it was always white guys in the podcast space, right? So I'm like, can we talk about brown people? And really the ongoing theme with most of my work, which is, can we flip it to people of color, women of color, more diversity? But then I got reversed racism attacked, which was kind of funny. But then I was like, okay, good point. No, I like white guys. I'm not anti-white guys. They got to be on my show. So I quickly called you.
What else do you have to say and think about white guys? We can talk about doctors. Well, so I have prepared to interview you. I would like to interview you about your amazing book. Are you ready for the book interview?
I am. I really, really am. Yes.
The Pain Gap: How Sexism and Racism in Healthcare Kill Women. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
It's like your third child.
Can I tell you it's my third and favorite child? I keep saying this, but I'm not even lying. Like, it really is. It's my favorite child. I look at it, and every time I hold it, like, near me, it's the same feeling I have when I hold one of my kids to my heart. The book doesn't talk back. The book listens. Goes where you want it to go. But yeah, I'm so happy. I never thought this would happen. It was so hard, Pete. It was so hard.
I do think it's weird that you put an extra chair at dinner and you put the book in it. That's weird.
Do you think that was weird? Is this a really freaking great idea?
Your kids reached out to me and said, enough.
Space in our bed.
So I didn't realize when you told me about the book that you're working on it, that I guess maybe if you told me, forgive me, that it was going to be so personal. I mean, I knew you were going to use your own personal experience in terms of your delivery, your pregnancy, but that it's very much part memoir, which I really liked because you and I have been talking for a long time. But now I really feel like I've gotten to know you because of what you shared. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about your life, if we could, first.
Sure, definitely.
So you grew up, the first chapter is titled The First Feminist I Ever Knew. And we learn about your mom and your dad, who are basically like government royalty. Now, I guess I shouldn't use that word, but they were, in the government. Your dad was a cabinet secretary and your mom was a minister of parliament, which is similar in America. We have that. It's Congress, but it'd be the equivalent of the secretary of blank and what?
Well, she was a member of parliament, but my father was a minister for, over 20 decades, 20 years. So much like a senator, back to back to back. But my grandfather, my father's father, was, is considered one of Bangladesh's founding fathers. But it's so funny that you say that. And it's so funny that we're having this conversation because my whole life, and a big reason why I didn't want to live back home was exactly because of this. Okay, it was just the worst.
You're basically Prince Harry.
I am not Prince Harry.
You abandon your country.
I'm Meghan. No, you know what it is? I never, there's so much privilege and I'm so grateful for so many things. But I mean, I feel like America gave me a chance to really be my own person. And when I came here for college, it was about no one cared. No one cared who your father was. Versus growing up, you make the honor roll. Oh, your dad did it. Oh, you got a nice outfit. Your dad, my whole life. So it's really funny because I did an interview the other day and I had a moment where I was like, yes, you know what? I am going to talk about my family in Bangladesh and my mom and my dad and my grandfather, because I feel like now I can, because I have my own accomplishment and identity. And it took me 41 years to get here, but I do feel like that. I've never been so comfortable or accepting of, these questions that come to me in interviews, especially in the last, 2 weeks with my book coming out yesterday. People are like, oh, you're dead. I was speaking with Dean Abdullah, who I love so much and who has supported me way back when. I mean, I don't even know. I don't think Dean likes it when you give him too much attention and praise, but he is amazing and was such a huge supporter. But I was talking to him the other day and he brought some of my family background up because he was shocked. He was like, I had no idea your parents were active politically in Bangladesh. I was like, oh God, yes. But anyhow, I definitely feel more comfortable and I'm so impressed with your background research, Pete.
Well, I'm reading your book. It's a great book. I mean, we're selling it now.
Only the first 2 chapters are memoir-esque, by the way. Then it all delves into like research and current events. So, yeah.
Well, then let me ask you another kind of personal question about that, because you do touch on it when you talk about, hey, I've always been, you say, you read about how you've always been an advocate for women, but often people who are advocates are not always their own self-advocate when it comes to any number of things, whether it be in a imbalanced or even abusive relationship or healthcare decisions or work-related decisions. You're over here helping everybody else, supporting others, but when you're in a situation, you're not necessarily the best. So my question to you is, was there kind of and I've been talking to a lot of women about this similar issue lately, was there kind of an arc of confidence, your self-discovery? How did you figure out who you are? When you're raised by a feminist, you have this certain empowerment, I'm sure, but how did it work for you and how did it change in your, what did you say, 41 years?
41 years. Oh, that's such a good question. Probably a great topic for my next book.
Ooh, yeah.
I don't know. It's so hard. I'm still processing the trauma of what happened to me. I really am. I said this the other day when I was speaking with Mika, and I said this in another interview, because people are now articulating things to me and saying things to me about my book, which maybe even I don't even know, I mean, just like last night, I said to my husband, what happened to me was so racist and sexist. Could have killed me. He was like, I know, I was there. You wrote a whole book about it, but I couldn't say that out loud. I think I just said that out loud really for the first time here. So I didn't know. Can I tell you even though the heart and soul of this is women's stories and my story, my personal experience backed up by serious research and data, not just women pondering our feelings. But I still don't believe it. I still don't believe it. I mean, I could have died. And I know now why I didn't speak up, because I thought I was going to be dismissed and not believed. And from what my research shows, most women of color are. So yeah.
That's why it's such an interesting book and an important subject. Let me stick with another kind of generality before we drill down into some of the specifics, which is, I think I've talked to you about this before. Defining strength is a fun thing to do, and we define strength often by how much weight you can lift, how tough you are, She's very strong. He's so strong, whatever that brings up in you, that makes you think. And a lot of it is just, some typical gender stuff, I suppose. But I think the best or really interesting and important definition of strength is how much pain you can take. And it's anecdotal, but the type of, injuries men have, illnesses men have, and how they deal with them versus women and how they deal with them. How do you define strength if pain is one of the ways, a variable that should be used? Because I think it should be used.
Yeah, that is such an excellent question and an excellent point. Well, somebody told me while I was researching this book, a really amazing woman who is featured and interviewed in the book, Gabrielle Jackson, but she said that women's pain is at once expected and denied. And I thought that was so perfectly articulated because you are expected as a woman. You really are to just suck it up. I mean, can I tell you if men had to deal with menstrual cramps, which, by the way, a lot of experts compare to having 2 or 3 heart attacks in a row. Like, it's very painful. It would be a national holiday every month, for sure. You know it. And if men could get pregnant, Starbucks with the abortions, no debate. No debate.
Right.
So you don't even know. I mean, my own husband, who is really amazing and has no choice but to be this great advocate and support, he will be like X, Y, and Z. It's just your hormones, or it's in your head. It's not that bad. And I'm like, have you ever had your period? Have you ever had your body let go? Basically disposing of an egg that wasn't fertilized. You know how painful that is?
I don't.
No, they don't.
I once, out of just trying to be a strong feminist, I once put I put a dozen eggs in my ass.
No, you didn't.
I did. Hard boiled.
No, you did not.
Hard boiled eggs.
No.
It was just for a bit for Jackass. But anyway, no, I mean, I'm just making fun of the idea of no, you can't, we can't relate to certain gender things. It's important.
You know what, really quick, while the very most is made out of male pain, the very least is made out of female pain. And now we have studies that show that women have to wait, 3 to 4 times longer just to be seen.
Well, don't you think
we're not believed? Have you ever met a man who was like, I went to the emergency room and said I was in excruciating pain and I think I'm going to die, and no one believed me? No.
I think that women just yap about their pain so much, and men just don't say anything. And that's why we think that that's why it's expected. And if men would yap about any of our pain, especially our emotional pain, we could solve the world's problems, but we don't yap.
You think women are yapping about their pain?
I think yapping is a sexist term. And I
have my pen out to poke your eyeballs out.
No, I use it.
Yapping about our pain? The thesis of my book is we are not talking about it enough because we know we're not going to be believed or we're going to be dismissed.
You're not following me. Some people that are listening might be.
Okay.
If men... the sexist term is you're yapping. That's a negative term. It shouldn't be. Talking about your pain is what your book is about. Men aren't as likely to talk about their pain because that's not seen as strong. It is strong. It's the strongest thing you do. So we should all be yapping with a therapist or anybody who would listen about our problems. And if the thing is that women are more likely, I'm guessing, to be verbally discussing any of their issues, and men are more likely to keep them inside and not talk about them because of gender. That's what I was trying to say. Are you with me now?
That is true. Yes, of course. And I know how you are a part of really amazing male talk groups, not talking groups, but conversation groups and support groups, right? That are all about, hey, we are really against toxic masculinity. That's a big thing. But you know what? There's a pain gap. There's also a credibility gap.
Yes.
I mean, it's shocking how many women, forget my story. My story is like a little, I don't even know what. At one point when I was researching my book, Pete, and this is so true, I was like, I don't have a book and I don't have a thesis because every woman has a story. These stories are so common. They're everywhere. And it actually took me, a couple of weeks, I'll say weeks, just circle around and be like, oh no, that is the thesis. Why are these stories so common? Why is it so common for women not to be believed? And that is what drove me. And then I realized when I started, that's where I started for research in this book. I just started speaking with women. And when you read the book, you'll see it's like women's stories, facts, women's stories, research, women's stories, data. And I didn't plan it to be like that, but it ended up being like that because finally, what women have been having hunches about and having, being suspicious about, or what we know, what we've been feeling, is now backed with studies. We are literally not believed about our pain. There's a pain gap and there's a credibility gap.
And I want to, throw out another trope. This time I'm letting you know I'm doing it so that you see it coming, so you don't stab me. But and there's an intersectionality here that you discuss as well. Obviously, it's worse for women of color, but this is an issue of women. And so we'll get to the racial part of it in a moment here. But the other trope is that women are emotional, which is another one that makes me laugh. And I love to flip on my head because men are also emotional. We just don't use the word emotion to describe anger and rage.
Yeah. So men are emotional, but women are hysterical. I actually wanted to call the book Hysterical.
Right.
Really fought for that. As you can see, I didn't get my way and I didn't win. But it's so interesting. At one point in my research, I just said out loud, and it's in the book, that has it always been this way? Have women just never been believed? Have we always been termed as over emotional and it's all in our heads and imagining our pain? And the answer is yes. Pete, the answer is yes. Yeah. From the ancient Greeks to the ancient Egyptians, there's over 4,000 years of literature all about how women become hysterical. And the Victorians were, really great about this because for them, hysteria was just a blanket term for anything that is wrong with you. Why are women freaking out? They're hysterical. Why are women passing out? They're hysterical. And so it goes on. And for the Greeks, they thought that if your uterus, which was a wandering animal, Hippocrates famously said this, if it wasn't where it was supposed to be and it started bouncing around your body, it caused a whole host of hysterical problems. And, the ancient Egyptians thought this as well. So everything was always rooted down to women's reproduction and women's uteruses. When guess what? We are also people and we have a whole host of other issues. But what I say in my book is that women have a hysteria complex, and rightfully so. Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Ian said something to me yesterday. Sorry to interrupt. I'll tell you really quick. He said something to me yesterday that I was kind of like, I think you've solved years of therapy for me.
What was it?
Because he said, I didn't speak up because I didn't want to be labeled as hysterical. And it seems so obvious now, but it honestly took me almost 11 years to articulate that. And I didn't even articulate it. Like, trauma is so weird, right, Pete? Like, look at me. I'm all about calling it out. Well, but you really can't call it out. It takes years to process.
Yeah, it takes years to process. But even if you even consider, most people probably who deal with a lot of trauma or any trauma probably never even recognize it, much less process it or get to the root of it. The fact that you have and that I've tried to with mine, my wife has tried to, like, it's like everybody I know is trying to deal with it. I mean, all this trauma from the pandemic, of course. I've got a lot to say about that. But let me just, hysterical is a word that you're now owning in this book with your work, which I love. Yeah. But it's also, again, a gendered word. And it's about that women are, I'll let you fill in the blanks. But I also would love to challenge you. And if you can't think of one off the top of your head, I'll give you 5. Of a man who you could use that word, and not hysterical funny, but hysterical the way it's used to describe women. Because I've got several men who I would say are absolutely hysterical in terms of the way that is used. But how do you mean it? What do you hear when you hear that word, and how are you trying to own it?
Oh, I love you for asking that. Pete, you're so freaking smart and so funny. And you know what? I want to go back really quick to say that if you are going to be funny and hysterical in a different way, you have to be very intelligent. The word hysterical, as we know, medically is described as gender neutral. Okay. But who does it remain inextricably linked to women.
Right.
When do we call men hysterical? When, Pete?
Only when they're being funny.
Funny.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a compliment.
Of course, Pete Dominic would know the answer to this question, but yes, it's never something to discredit them.
Do you know how many times I've been referred to as hysterical in my life? Like, it's been daily experience. If I don't get that I'm hysterical, I feel like something's gone wrong. It's like a drip of dopamine for me from my childhood. It's a compliment when you get called hysterical, or most women. What is it meant? What does that mean? How is it heard? Yes. Why is it bad?
Yes, exactly. Well, the reason that it's bad, it means that you're over emotional and you're not making a good decision because you're not capable of making a good decision. And more than anything, you're not believed. Hysteria discredits women. And a big thing that I advocate for in the book is, can we flip our hysteria complex? Okay. If the default now is don't believe women, she's being hysterical. And women are not speaking out because they don't want to be labeled as hysterical. And by the way, they're right. Before writing this book, I would be like, no, speak up. We got a point. Now I'm like, oh, I understand why women aren't speaking up.
Right.
They know they're not going to be believed. They're scared it's going to make the situation worse. And what a lot of women have gotten in touch with me since writing this book is, I was discredited because I spoke up. You know, I was discredited because I freaked out when everyone thought that I shouldn't have. So another thing I'm saying in the book is that we have to flip we have to trust women. The radical proposal in the book is believe women. Believe women of color. If our default now is not to believe women, let's change that. What happens when our default is, I believe you? We're not going to go all the way when we have a baby coming out of our legs and we're going to be lying about our pain. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So believe women when they say what? What are some examples about when don't
they say, I think something is wrong. I'm in pain. I can feel this. It's a lot of pain.
You're being hysterical.
It's not working out. Yeah, I'm not being hysterical.
So easy.
But also it's very difficult. I mean, it's very, this is the other most important thing about my book. It's not a doom and gloom book. It's not like, oh, no one believes women and racism is terrible and we're all just screwed. No, everything I'm talking about is solvable. Over 90% of these deaths are preventable. Why? We know how to intervene and stop and solve pregnancy complications. Do we believe women and do we believe in saving women's lives? Is it a priority? And by the way, the answer is no. The pandemic showed us no. And that is a problem. That's the problem. This is not AIDS or cancer. This is women's health. And the reason I keep bringing up, this is a very important point. The reason I keep bringing up maternal mortality is not only because it is an indicator of, it tells us how many women are dying in childbirth. No, it's an indicator of the overall position of women in society. It's an indicator of how your health system is functioning.
Right.
And if in the richest country in the world, the richest democracy in the world, women are dying in childbirth in 2021, that doesn't tell you we don't have the expertise. That tells you something is really effing wrong and we don't value women's health or women's lives. And that to me is unacceptable. Unacceptable.
I value it in that I want to be in charge of it, to be clear.
Oh my God, Pete, are you the only person that could make me laugh out loud? Yes, you do value it and you do want to be in control of it. Well, definitely people do on Capitol Hill.
I respect women. I have women in my life and I want to make their decisions for them because
I feel like your wife and your daughters would not allow that.
Very, very smart.
Yeah, they might beat the crap out of you, Pete. I worry about you.
I asked my daughter the other day to hold back her opinion on something. And she really took it like the wrong way. She's like, how dare you ever tell me to hold back my opinion? And I was like, that's generally how I want you to feel. But I don't think right now it's helpful to share that opinion in this situation. It's not always helpful.
Well, I know that you interview and have guests on your show and it's supposed to be about your guests, but I do want to quickly say, Pete, that you are really one of the few men, and there are great men in the world. Yes, not bashing men, but there are a couple of men that really get it.
Well,
I mean, my husband is always like, why do we have to debate this? I'm like, we don't. Thank you, honey. You don't. So
I don't know. Yeah, I wonder. My story is just really being curious and wanting to be the best dad I could be. Like, a lot of feminists don't like when men especially say, you know, I'm doing this because I have daughters, but my brother was an anti-feminist, and an anti-racist long before anybody used those words. And so I had him for sure. I had a strong mom, but I think having daughters, I was like, how can I be the best dad to them? And then I quickly learned, unfortunately, I have to always do my best to be respectful of their mom, which is really hard when we're arguing. And I've failed. It's my worst failure as a father and a husband when I've lost my composure and temper with them. So I've got a lot to learn, but I also just wanted to get educated on it. And I still, though, reading your book, I'm still learning so much. And there's getting back to it. There's a lot to learn about women's health, especially for men. I actually, in prepping for the book, embarrassingly had to go look up endometriosis, and it sounds horrible, by the way.
Too.
So
a lot of women do too.
But the question is, I want to get to the race thing because I know we only have a couple more minutes, and you have a chapter called "The Truth About Treatment for Women of Color," and I think it's really important just to set it up with that. We are the richest country in the world, and yet we have these maternal mortality rates that you talk about and write about that are embarrassing. But the truth is, women who are more affluent have awesome health outcomes by most measures. So it's more about socioeconomics. The problem, however, is the statistic that you mentioned, which is the best statistic to talk about and define systemic racism, which is women with college educations. Besides you talking about this, the only thing I ever knew was Bakari Sellers writing about his wife in his memoir. I hadn't really heard much about women of color, especially with healthcare outcomes. And so this is the point. Women with, who are more affluent and women of color who are more affluent with educations are suffering worse outcomes than white women who don't. That's the big statistic. Sorry for talking for so long. Go ahead.
Please don't apologize. And you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is what breaks my heart. I had somebody come interview me a couple of days ago before the book came out. And she said to me, even after I've written this effing book, Pete, she said, well, don't you ever think it's a one-off and just one person? And I'm like, I want to kill myself now, but I can't. Yeah. But it's kind of like police brutality. I guess if you look at one death and one policeman at a time, but
it's easy.
It's easy.
It gives people permission to think in anecdotes. It makes people feel good about the argument and about the world. I mean, how many people came out at my Board of Education meeting and said, I haven't seen any racism. We don't have a racism problem. It makes them feel good because they haven't seen it. But what you're doing with your book is you're using data sets. Yeah. That's how we should be making.
I don't know why people are so surprised that there's data sets. I mean, I was grateful as a woman of color that there are now data sets, but it's disturbing to me how people are surprised about this because people of color know this and women of color know this. But for so long before COVID, right, we could debate racism. Good ponder. It was controversial. But now we know that it's racism and not race that is killing women of color in America. Okay, Black women. I say this in the book. When things are bad for white women, and healthcare, by the way, for all women is a little, hit or miss in America. It depends on your insurance. It depends on your affluence, but it depends on your race. And if something is bad for white women, it's pretty bad for women of color, but it's the worst for Black women. Black women are 243% more likely to die giving birth in America. Why? And for so long, people were like, Black people are poor. Black people are uneducated. Black people XYZ. Really, really racist and incorrect explanations. Now we know that Black women who are college educated are 5 times more likely to die giving birth in America than a white woman with a high school degree. And yeah, if you look at that one birth, maybe that's a problem of what is going on. It's systemic. It's systemic. And it's still so hard for me to say that the color of my skin played a role in how I was treated during what I thought was going to be the most, empowering experience of my life. I hate saying that. I hate my story. But when I listen to other women and I'm looking at the stats, it just breaks it's so wrong. And it's such a solvable injustice. Like, no woman should die giving birth, especially in the richest country in the world. No woman should die giving life.
There's just one observation I wanted to make and get your take on before I let you go, which is, as I'm reading your book and as I'm hearing you talk about it, I can't help but think about my relationships with women of color in my life, throughout my life. And whether or not I was really close with certain women at certain times of my life or am now, I generally, as close as I was and am, I don't talk about their health care. They don't talk about their health care issues with me. Yeah. And so I don't know anything. Oh. Why would I? I mean, there's not enough black women in my life, women of color in my life that I'm so intimate with that I would hear about any of their issues. And so that's why you and me talking, white people talking with black people and brown people, that's why we need to be hearing these stories and listen to these statistics to know that it's a problem. And that's what being an anti-racist is.
Yes, it's active, and people don't like that. It's an active thing to do. But also, Pete, you have, not to butter you up and, your ass, kiss your white ass. But you have also created something which is very difficult to do. It really is. Let me tell you, as a person of color, create a space where people can have a real conversation, not just, yes, white men. Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
nice, really great. Real, I need to do this and maybe you need to do that. So that is what I love about your show, aside from you making me bring out my my donkey laugh.
I love you. I don't know. No, I don't. I've told you this before. You have a weird I have a lot of thoughts about people's laughs, but yours is I love it. It's like a symphony. I don't know why it's wonderful. I love that.
It's because my high school best friend told me I sound like a donkey when we were
it is so. Listen, I don't think this is a gender thing. I think women suffer. I think women suffer from this more than men, but men definitely. Maybe it's nothing at all. One comment that somebody made at the right time, the right person, will stick with you your whole life. I feel like everybody has that, though.
Yeah. What the heck, man?
And you never forget that person's name.
Bitch. Don't quote me. Oh, is this live? Just kidding.
No, I can edit it out. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, there you go. Anushay Hossain, so great to get her back on the program. Love talking to her. And I'm really excited about her new book, The Pain Gap, How Sexism and Racism in Healthcare Kill Women. Go follow her on Twitter. Let her know that you heard her here on the show. Listen to her podcast as well. She does a great podcast, Spilling Chai. Go listen to that. All the links to all of her work are in today's show notes, as they are for every guest in every day's show notes. I put a lot of the work into the show notes, so hopefully you read them and listen to them. Listen to them, read them. Well, if you're a subscriber, you get special email every day from me. So if you're not a subscriber, you got to get it, because you get a nature picture every day, which is submitted by another listener. And so you should get on board. Go subscribe right now. StandUpWithPete.com. Okay, regular guest here, almost weekly, probably every other week. And everybody but Phil Round loves Eric Segall. Phil is always critical of it, and I love it. I love it all. I love all the criticism. If others are, then send me an email and I'll forward it to Eric and he'll address your criticism. StandUpWithPete@gmail.com. He, of course, is a constitutional law scholar at Georgia State University. He's the author of Supreme Myths, and he hosts a podcast by the same name now, Supreme Myths. Get his book, as well as Originalism as Faith. That's his last book. And follow him on Twitter at eSpinSegall. Lots to talk about with Eric Segall. And I just want to play, before I hit our interview, I'm going to let you hear the sound from Elena Kagan that we discuss. I don't know what she's talking about with his Latin stuff. I'm going to learn about it, but Segall mentions it too, but here is Elena Kagan. He references this. This is, of course, from yesterday's hearings at the Supreme Court, where they considered two challenges to Texas's restrictive abortion law from both abortion providers and from the federal government.
The court is going to stand by its
General
word.
Stone, I think what Justice Breyer is suggesting is that the entire point of this law, its purpose and its effect, is to find the chink in the armor of Ex parte Young. That Ex parte Young set out a basic principle of how our government is supposed to work and how people can seek review of unconstitutional state laws. And the fact that after, these many years, some geniuses came up with a way to evade the commands of that decision, as well as the command that the even broader principle that states are not to nullify federal constitutional rights. And to say, we've never seen this before, so we can't do anything about it. I guess I just don't understand the argument.
All right, there is Elena Kagan, and Segall references that, so I wanted to have a little bit more perspective and context on it. And now it's time for a brand new introduction jingle for Eric Segall, submitted by the great Pete Coe, at Pete Coe, Coevo, on Twitter. Here we go. Segall got to hear this, too.
Bringing knowledge and gloom and a guest house too. He's got a Labrador dog, glad to give you a poo, 'cause he's the legal eagle.
Eric Segall.
Eric Segall.
That's awesome.
What do you think of your new theme song?
I think it's awesome. I'm flattered. I think it's great. I think it's better than the old theme song from the old show, and I'm just very flattered. And I don't accept the truth of the matter asserted, but nevertheless, it's a great song.
He wants to love it, but the guest house is really holding you back, isn't it?
The Atlanta sports is holding me back, but we don't want to go there.
No, let's not go there.
No.
Well, that's Pete Coe. Yeah. You want to say thank you to him?
Thank you, Pete. I really appreciate it, and it sounds awesome. Thank you.
All right,
but it's not true, just for the record. But it's still awesome. Go ahead.
Well, what you're here today to talk about, we are talking about the Texas abortion law that's back before the Supreme Court.
Yes, exactly. And so real quick, there were two cases. In one case, so Texas has banned all abortions after 6 weeks, which you and I both know effectively bans all abortions, right? Because very few women know they are pregnant at 6 weeks. I mean, some do, but then you have to go to a doctor and all that by 6 weeks. So it's basically a ban on abortion in most cases. And I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of it, but basically the Texas Attorney General, Texas DAs, they have no authority to enforce the law. What the law says is you can sue, anyone in the world, galaxy or universe, can sue someone in Texas who helps somebody get an abortion. You can't sue the woman, but you can sue the doctor, the driver to the abortion clinic, Planned Parenthood, anybody other than the woman who helps facilitate the abortion. If you prove an abortion occurred after 6 weeks, you get at least $10,000, maybe more. And there are all kinds of other jurisdictional venue type legal stuff things. That's my technical term, legal stuff things that we don't have to talk about that make this a unique law. Everybody in the court today, no one disagreed that this was a unique law. And its whole purpose was to thwart, obviously, the constitutional right to abortion, which still exists. Now, it may not exist in June, but it absolutely unequivocally still exists today in the state of Texas. Two cases, one brought by clinics who are challenging this, and one brought by the U.S. government.
Right. So the first case is brought by abortion providers. The second is brought by the Justice Department.
And now I want to be clear. There are really complicated, even for federal court jurisdiction experts, and I think there are three things in life I'm an expert on: federal jurisdiction, constitutional law, and the NBA. And maybe Billy Joel. So I'm an expert on this, but I don't want to discuss the intricacies of it. If you want that, there are all kinds of places to go. Dorf on Law has done a couple of things on it. I just want to say this, and Steve Vladeck, who's really an expert on federal jurisdictional matters, he's really good, and we're friends. He's on your show. He and I agree on this. It's almost we're pretty confident that this law is going to be struck down as to the abortion providers. In other words, the Supreme Court is not going to let this particular law stand. So as I said this to you before. I said it to you a month ago, 2 months ago, and Steve agrees, and a bunch of other people agree. Now, you never know. Prediction is hard. The U.S. case brought by the United States to vindicate federal rights, they're going to either lose or that case is going to just go away as like moot, or the court's not going to resolve that case in any kind of serious way. The problem with this law for the Supreme Court is the same law could be passed about gun rights, and various justices, including Kavanaugh, focused on that today. It could be brought about religion rights, which would bother Kavanaugh and Barrett quite a bit. It was pretty clear after argument that everybody but Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas are going to vote to strike this down, and maybe even Gorsuch and Thomas. Alito is going to be the usual major league peckerhead that he is, but Roberts was very, very cynical about this law. So I don't want so as I've said all along,
in the arguments today.
Yes. Roberts was incredibly critical in the abortion clinic providers case. This law, Pete, is unprecedented. It's basically an effort by a former Scalia clerk, irony of ironies, who wrote this law to effectively take jurisdiction away from the federal courts to hear constitutional cases. And in fact, that guy had 10 minutes of argument today. It was mostly Texas and the government and the abortion providers, but also this guy. Before this guy, and in his brief, he said states aren't bound by Supreme Court decisions.
What?
Justice Roberts didn't ask him about that, but he asked the lawyer for the state of Texas point blank. Do you agree with the amicus brief, meaning the friend of the court brief, filed by the guy who actually wrote the law, that the Supreme Court of Texas and Texas in general doesn't have to abide by Supreme Court doctrine? He said, we absolutely do not believe that. Of course, the state of Texas in all levels of government will abide by Supreme Court decisions. So they didn't even ask the guy who said that the question, because we don't really care what he thinks, because he's an idiot. Not an idiot. Take that back. I'm sorry. I've had a long day. He is a silly, very smart, but silly ex-Scalia clerk who thinks he's smarter than he is. Don't worry about it. I want to make, for your audience, Pete, I want to make a few other points, okay? Human points. First of all, lost in the argument today, although Sotomayor and Kagan tried their best to put it in there, they couldn't do it very well. It wasn't their fault. In Texas, abortions have basically stopped.
Right.
And since abortion is still a constitutional right in this country, which it is, I mean, Roe and Casey are still good law, Pete. No undue burdens on women's right to an abortion before viability is the law of the land. Texas has stopped that. And that's wrong. And all these jurisdictional, niceties that I'll teach next year in federal jurisdiction in my federal courts class and all that, we should not lose sight of the fact that most women who want abortions in Texas now have to leave the state. If you're rich, of course, you can do that, right? But if you're poor or lower, even lower middle class, you're not going to be able to do that easily or at all. And that's a real, real shame. You know my feelings about Roe and Casey, but the reality is there is still a constitutional right to abortion in this country. And Texas has taken it away, and Texas shouldn't be allowed to do that. So that's one thing.
Right.
Secondly, Pete,
I mean, I'm still hung up on that. He argued the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction over the states. I'm confused.
Well, now Texas didn't argue that. The guy who wrote the law argued.
Yeah. Who would argue that?
It's crazy. Well, not the state of Texas, because Roberts asked them point blank, and they disowned it as fast as you can possibly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's not a serious thing. I mean, by the way, we could have a discussion what my views on that are, but it doesn't matter. It's not happening in this world. It's kind of like a lot of the things you wouldn't let me talk about years ago. Like, I don't know. Trump becoming president. It's never going to happen. I'm kidding you. That's a joke. This is never going to happen. We don't have to worry about it. So I really want to make this point, because what gets lost in Supreme Court decisions of this magnitude involving guns, abortion, freedom of speech, campaign finance reform is this. We have two human beings on this court, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, who have devoted their life to public service. And even conservatives would say, they are public servants. They deserve our respect. They deserve our admiration. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any academic who wouldn't say they are great, Americans, even if they disagree with everything they say. I think Justice Roberts, I just wrote an article saying he's full of hubris. I don't like him, but he's a civil servant serving the country, and he could have made much more money, law firms and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Pete, these two women feel strongly about the right to choose, very strongly. And they are stifled in their efforts to keep Roe versus Wade and Casey on the books. But worse than that, they have to sit by and listen to all these men and Justice Barrett, who, by the way, was equivocating today. Justice Barrett, I think, is going to vote to strike down the Texas law, which is interesting. But let's leave Barrett out of it because she's new, right? She's a year. She's been around just a couple of years. Kagan and Sotomayor for a decade now have had to sit and listen to these men talk so casually about the right to choose.
Right.
And that, I want to say, I mean, these women have devoted their lives to feminist issues, and Kagan is very moderate. It's not like Kagan is some, I think Sotomayor is very, very liberal and progressive. And I think Kagan's moderate, but she believes strongly in the right to choose. It's so hard. And they're the ones who should be dominating the conversation, right, Pete? They're the women. They're the only, leaving aside Barrett, who also, they're the three people who can actually have abortions. They're the three people who this really affects. And they're probably past the time, but that is my point. It's so frustrating for them to sit there and hear these men like Gorsuch and Alito pontificate about how this isn't a big deal. Like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are both, Kavanaugh had the gall to ask this question today. So abortions aren't happening in Texas, but how do we know, he really said this, how do we know this law is the cause of that? Maybe the cause of women not having abortions in Texas anymore, mostly, is the fear that Roe and Casey will be overturned in June. Can you imagine a stupider question than that? Can you imagine?
Say it again, the fear that Roe and Casey
will someday be overturned, so women aren't having abortions now. I'm not kidding. He asked that question. In other words, what the clinic said and what the United States said was abortion's basically over in Texas, even though it's a constitutional right. Why is it over in Texas? Because of this law. Okay, right. Very easy argument, right? Because providers can't provide abortions, Pete. They can be sued over and over and over again for damages and attorney's fees. And they can be sued in every venue in Texas and by anybody in the world. It doesn't have to be a Texas citizen. Someone from Montana could come down and sue them. So the point was, there's a constitutional right to abortion that the state of Texas has taken away, right? Alito says, how do we know this law takes it away? Maybe they're just afraid that Roe and Casey are going to be overturned. It's not even a question that makes sense, right? Like there are women in Texas who are saying, I want to get an abortion, but Roe and Casey might be overturned in June, so I'm not going to get an abortion today. It's not even a sensible question, but he's doing everything to deflect from the fact that Texas has stopped a constitutional right in Texas. And for them to have to sit there patiently and be respectful.
Yeah.
And by the way, Kagan did lose it for a minute today.
He did.
I don't blame it. And it was actually, she lost it twice. And by the way, you're not going to read this anyplace else. This is an exclusive. Well, one's an exclusive from Segall. The other one is not. The non-exclusive one, because a couple other people noticed this, is she very sarcastically referred to the people who wrote this law as geniuses. But she said it with contempt. The genius, and that's not something she normally does. And maybe that's not appropriate for a justice. I'm not going to say yes or no, but you could tell how mad she was, right? Because that she said it in a way that what she meant was monsters. She said geniuses, but she meant monsters, and her meaning was clear.
Well, they are.
Yes,
they have done a brilliant. They really covered themselves in many ways to get away with this, but you look at. Your friend Mark Joseph Stern over at Slate, who says the architects of Texas's abortion ban overplayed their hand. 3 conservative justices recognized the law for what it is, in affront to their own authority. What do you think of that?
Yes, I've been saying that on your program. I've been saying it for months. Yes, that's absolutely true. That's 100% true. But the other thing Kagan did today, and there's no blame here. Okay, I'm not asperging any blame. I'm using it as a data point about how frustrated these women must be, and I sympathize and empathize with them. At one point, now, this is going to be scrubbed from the transcript, by the way. They do that. I don't know if it is. I haven't looked at the transcript yet. My guess is they're going to scrub it, but they may not. When referring to the abortion providers' lawsuits here, she said we. Kagan said we, which I'm 99% sure will not make it into the final transcript, but which is true. She said. And again, all that goes to is how emotional this is for them.
Right. Right. Just real quick, explain why that's such a big deal. I mean, I think I know what you mean, but you can't. She's showing what side she's on, and she's supposed to be objective in the questioning.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And
meaning she's on the side of women because she's a woman.
Right. Well, no. Okay, let's be fair. She's on the side of abortion providers. What she's really saying. Well, but that's the same thing. But that's the same thing as being on the side of women. You and I agree on that. 100%. Okay. So I wanted those data. That data, and Kagan is now. This is universally accepted. Other than Roberts and maybe Scalia before Roberts, people would say Kagan is the most, concise, great questioner. At what point today she said to one of the lawyers. The lawyer for the state of Texas and the other guy who wrote the law were making arguments like, well, go to Congress if you're frustrated. Go to Congress if you're upset.
Right.
And Kagan said, and Eli, your friend Eli, how do you pronounce his last name? Mistel? I don't know how you pronounce his last name.
Mistel.
Yeah, he caught up. He tweeted this out. He pointed out that Kagan's response was, I thought the whole point of rights was you didn't have to rely on Congress, which was a great thing for Kagan to say. I tweeted about that just now, saying Kagan's a great role model for lawyers and law students and people in general, because she says exactly what she means in as few words as possible. She says exactly what she means in as few words as possible. My point there being what I just said to you, conservatives accept. I know a lot of conservative FedSoc law professors. They respect Kagan's ability to ask questions, to write opinions. They respect her intelligence. They just do. They disagree with her, but they respect her. For her to make these two slips today, the very sarcastic use of the word geniuses and the use of the word we when referring to the plaintiffs shows you what kind of stress she's under. And I mention that for another reason. I want to go back to Judge Pryor for a minute. Judge Pryor's the guy who hired the law clerk who said, I hate black people.
Yeah, you can't just reset.
I know.
Say it again. Judge Pryor is the guy who...
The chief judge of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, the tied for the second highest court in the United States, has hired a clerk who said, I hate black people, and he's never made a public statement about it, and she has not denied saying it. She said, I don't remember saying it, but she's never denied saying it. But I want to make a different point. I was talking to someone who is tangentially involved in everything like this, who a woman, but I'm not going to tell you the role or anything else. And she's so tired of fighting. She's so tired of fighting.
Dan.
Me too, Pete. And the overall sense I got from Kagan and Sotomayor today was they're so tired of fighting.
Right.
And it takes such strength and such courage. I don't agree with them a lot of the time because my views on judicial review, but I admire them so much. And here's the contrast. And it's a serious contrast. Justice Breyer, who's on their side 95% of cases. I swear to God, Pete, he giggled when he asked questions today. I tweeted this out too. He giggled. He literally was giggling as he asked questions. And his whole tone was like, this was like an exercise in a law school classroom. And I'm so mad at him. A lot of progressives are mad at Justice Breyer. I am so mad at him because it denigrates A, the case, B, the important issues at stake, and his colleagues.
Right.
Because Kagan and Sotomayor were not giggling at all. At any, there was one joke I think Justice Roberts made or one of the lawyers made, which was legitimately funny. Everybody laughed, and that's good. That's a good thing. I think it's great for Americans to be able to hear, it was live streamed, or read that there was some, I have no problem with that, Pete. Reduce the tension in the room a little bit. That's fine. But that was an appropriate moment for it.
Right.
Breyer's giggling of his question was completely inappropriate.
Right.
I mean, completely inappropriate. And it's just one more piece of data he needs to go. I don't think he does that 10 years ago. So Breyer's always been criticized for long monologue, boring questions that aren't really questions. They're more like soliloquies. At the end, he asks, a question, but it's basically, didn't you agree with what I just? That's fine. That's different. Today, he did that too, but we expect that from Breyer. What he did today was inappropriate giggling at inappropriate times.
So
I wish it had been on TV. Because if it had been on TV, people would have seen it.
Well, yeah, there is audio, of course. But the big question seems to be whether or not the Supreme Court will enjoin SB 8 while they wait to strike it down on the merits, because they're probably going to strike it down. According to you and everybody I'm reading, there are 6 votes for that, it looks like. But the question is whether they stop it right now. Is that right?
That's right. So here's the down low on that, I think. Knowing again that all we're doing is predicting here, and things are you never know. So it's a balance. Since I believe, as do most people, that come June 30th, so right now you have a right to an abortion in this country until viability. After June 30th, I think at best, women are going to have a right to an abortion until 15 weeks. That's the Mississippi case. It might even be no right at all. They have to strike this law down and enjoin it well in advance of June, because this case is only a case if there's a constitutional right at play. And if they take away the constitutional right, there's no case, really. I mean, the law becomes very different if there's no constitutional right. So my prediction is I would like to see them enjoin the law tomorrow, because women in Texas can't get abortions. My prediction is they will issue a fast decision in a couple of months and strike down the law then. But that's a very shaky prediction. Like they might do it tomorrow and say opinion to follow or something, or they might wait 6 months. I don't know. So, but what they can't do is wait until June. That they can't do.
Right. Well, we don't know the answer, but that's the big question, of course. Will they enjoin? Yeah. So one more big question, or one more observation. You mentioned Elie Mystal, and he says one observation that he made during today, listening to the oral arguments, just how much male justices interrupt women lawyers and the other women justices. And then he went on to basically say how much better. He goes, well, let me just find this, about he actively hates Amy Coney Barrett, but it's clear how much more intelligent the women are than the men on the court, is something that respected
100%.
Why is that?
Great observation. By the way, so one more kind of human interest thing about this. So when the United States brings a lawsuit or defends against a lawsuit, against a federal law, the office of the Solicitor General, which is housed in the Justice Department, basically, they argue the case in the Supreme Court. They are the exclusive litigate for the United States government in the Supreme Court, which is why being Solicitor General, Ken Starr was Solicitor General, a bunch of other famous people were, Neil Cattell was Solicitor General. Famous people are Solicitor Generals. Robert Bork, I believe, don't quote me on this, was Solicitor General, I'm pretty sure. In any event, he was, because he's the one who fired the guy in the Saturday Night Massacre. Anyway, this person today was sworn in yesterday. This woman who argued the case today was sworn in yesterday. It's her first Supreme Court argument as Solicitor General. This is unanimous. I did not read a single thing on Twitter disagreeing with this. Pete, she's the best lawyer I've heard in so long. She was amazing. I mean, she was amazing. I'm going to make all my students listen to her argument. She was so good, which I think Ellie was responding to. She was so much better than the other lawyers, and she was so much better than all the other justices except Kagan and Sotomayor. Although Barrett wasn't terrible today. me, I try to be fair. I mean, Barrett raised some interesting questions, and she didn't play her cards, and she was pretty good. So I think Ellie's observation is better than any of mine. I think it's exactly right. I think the females were great. The males sucked, most of them. And by the way, what really gets my goat, so we'll go full circle. This is the kind of case where the males should be a little bit deferential to the females. Don't you think?
I mean,
it's abortion, Pete.
Yeah. I mean, I take a pause to try to imagine how or where there is a situation or case, but when it comes to body parts, like I'm really trying to be rudimentary here, like making decisions about, I guess it would be like women making decisions about, our prostate or something. If you want to take all the passion and emotion out of it, it's just a weird, it's always been weird. It's always been bizarre to me. It is weird.
Although I really have to say I feel scooped by Ellie, because it's a great observation he made.
Oh,
the men basically suck today.
Well, you've made it many times.
and the women were all stars today. And Barrett, I would even put Barrett in the Solicitor General was the star today. She was the star. There's no question. And then Kagan and Sotomayor were very great. And Barrett wasn't bad. Hate to say that. I don't like her at all, but she was pretty good today. And the men were awful, including Breyer. Breyer was as bad as any of the. Well, Alito's always the worst. By the way, Thomas asked a couple of decent questions, and he asked them respectfully. Alito was a jerk. Gorsuch was a jerk. Kavanaugh was good today, but that's just an aberration. So it's going to be interesting. Bottom line, this law will be struck down. I would bet 90% on that. Steve Vladeck agrees. A lot of Mark Stern agrees. A lot of people who study this stuff agree. Melissa Murray, I think, agrees. I think we all pretty much agree this Texas law is going away. But you raised a great point. When it goes away is really important.
Right.
Because if it's tomorrow, that's one thing. If it's 6 months from now, there are women who won't be able to get abortion. Right. And then their kids will be born, right? I mean, they can't, what are they going to do? If they're going to strike the law down anyway, it's just cruelty to wait. It's just cruelty.
I mean, we didn't even mention rape and incest.
and which are not exceptions to this law. I can't even, sometimes I can't even, that's almost too emotional for me to talk about. I can't even imagine having your 17, not your, I mean, we both have daughters, but imagine having our 17-year-old daughters raped. And if they give birth and they don't want to have this child because they're not ready, they're not going to be good mothers, and they don't want to live in the world knowing their child is out there somewhere being adopted. And they were raped. And in Texas, you can't get an abortion. I mean, I can't even. It's really hard to wrap your head around. And it wasn't. The thing about it is, the anti-abortion movement. It feels like as long as I've covered it, they stopped at that right
edge there, right? Most people overwhelmingly in polling and even in the anti-abortion made an exception, and when they didn't, they would lose elections, and it would be a huge issue. And
yes, exactly. Not anymore.
No,
not anymore.
Look, we're through the looking glass, my friend.
Yeah. Wait. I'm sorry. I'm getting. I want to say one more thing about that, about the rape, incest, abortion thing. Never mind. Edit that out.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me and doing this. Okay. Appreciate it as always, pal.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Bye. There he goes, the host of the Supreme Myths podcast, author of the book Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith, the Georgia State University constitutional legal scholar, Eric Segall, on Twitter at @eSpinSegall. Ladies and gentlemen, read the blog, Dorf on Law as well. Go get Anushay's book, The Pain Gap. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, as well as Pete Coe and, of course, John Carroll, who contributed to this show, the song Stand Up. We love you, John and Pete, and this show was booked by Pete Dominick, edited by Pete Dominick, hosted, researched, promoted, marketed by Pete Dominick, but supported by paid subscribers like you. If you aren't one, sign up now and support the work of Stand Up, bringing this community together and growing and helping us all understand this rapidly changing world that we are living in. Bye-bye. Take us away, John.
Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no good night. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and